There are 12 thrones on the summit of the world, and every single one of them was won by force, by cunning, or by inheritance from a crime. Not one of the gods who sits on Mount Olympus tonight arrived there peacefully. The king murdered his own father's rule and swallowed his first wife whole. The queen was tricked into her marriage and spent eternity taking revenge for it. The god of the forge was thrown from the mountain as an infant by his own mother and came back to build the very chairs they all sit in, including one designed as a trap. And the 12th seat, the last one, belonged to a goddess who quietly gave it away rather than fight for it. Tonight, we are going to climb that mountain together, walk into that hall, and meet every single one of them, one by one, until you understand not just who they were, but how they held together at all. Good evening, and welcome back. Before we set off up the slope, if you enjoy long, quiet journeys through the old stories, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps more than you know, and it means these long nights of mythology can keep coming. And as always, let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. I love seeing how far these old Greek voices travel. Now get comfortable, dim the lights, let your shoulders drop, and let us begin. Mount Olympus is a real place. That is the first thing worth sitting with. It is not a metaphor, not a cloud kingdom invented purely out of poetry. It stands in northern Greece, on the border between Thessaly and Macedonia, and its highest peak rises to nearly 2,920 meters above the sea. It is the tallest mountain in Greece. Its upper reaches are wrapped in cloud for most of the year, and for the people living in the valleys below, the summit was simply not visible. It was there, obviously there, enormous and permanent on the northern horizon, and yet it could not be seen. That combination of nearness and inaccessibility is exactly what a god is. Close enough to affect your harvest, far enough that you will never look him in the face. The Greeks imagined that above the cloud line, above the weather itself, the peak opened into something else. In the older poetry, Olympus is not a place of storms but a place entirely free of them. No wind shakes it, no rain falls on it, no snow gathers there. It sits in a permanent, clear brightness, and the gods walk in that brightness with the untroubled ease of beings who have never once been cold. Below them, the clouds close like a gate. Above them, only the shining upper air. It is worth holding that image in your mind for the whole of tonight, because every quarrel we are about to hear, every seduction and betrayal and act of terrible violence, takes place in a hall where the light never changes, and nothing ever ages. The palace itself was said to have been built by the god of the forge, and we will come to him and to the resentment he built into its walls. The floors were bronze. The gates were tended by the seasons, who rolled back the thick cloud that served as a door whenever a chariot needed to pass in or out. Inside, the gods ate ambrosia and drank nectar, and it was this diet, not their birth alone, that kept the blood in their veins from being blood at all. What ran in them was ichor, a shining fluid, and because they did not have blood, they could not truly die. They could be wounded. They could be humiliated, imprisoned, bound in chains, hurled off the edge of the mountain and left broken on an island for years. But they could not stop existing. Understanding that changes everything about how you hear their stories. When a god is injured, the injury does not end anything. It simply becomes another thing that God will carry, and remember, and eventually repay. Now, about the number 12. It is worth being honest with you from the start, because the truth is more interesting than the tidy version. There was never a single fixed, universally agreed list of 12 Olympians in the ancient Greek world. The core was never in doubt. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes. Those 11 were secure from the earliest poetry onward. It was the edges of the list where the arguments happened. Different cities counted differently. Different centuries counted differently. In some reckonings, the sea goddess, or the goddess of the hearth, held a place. In others, they did not. The cult of the 12 gods as a formal group seems to have taken shape in Athens around the 6th century before the Common Era, and an altar dedicated to the 12 was set up in the Athenian marketplace toward the end of that century. The concept of a divine council of 12 may well be older than Greece itself, and may have come in from Anatolia, from the east, along with a great many other things the Greeks quietly absorbed and then claimed as their own. What settled the matter for most of later tradition was art. The great frieze carved on the eastern face of the Parthenon in Athens, finished around 432 years before the Common Era, showed the assembled gods, and that carving is generally taken as the moment the canonical 12 were fixed for classical Athens. On it, Dionysus is present, Hestia, goddess of the hearth, whom almost any Greek of an earlier age would have named without hesitation as one of the 12, is not. That is the shift. That is the exchange we will come to at the very end of tonight, when we finally reach the 12th throne, and the god who took it. And there is one more absence you should notice immediately, because it explains a great deal about how the Greeks thought. Hades is not an Olympian. He is a son of Cronus and Rhea, brother to Zeus and Poseidon, older than most of the gods in that hall, and immeasurably powerful in his own right. But he does not live on the mountain. His kingdom is beneath the earth, and he almost never leaves it. The Olympians are defined not simply by power, but by residence and by visibility. They are the gods of the upper world, the gods you might in some terrible or wonderful moment actually meet. Hades is the god you meet only once. So how did the mountain come to be divided at all? The oldest account gives us 3 brothers and a drawing of lots. After the war that overthrew the previous generation of rulers, the 3 sons of Cronus divided the cosmos between them. Zeus received the wide sky and the upper air. Poseidon received the grey sea and all its waters. Hades received the misty darkness below. The earth itself and the peak of Olympus were left common ground, belonging to all 3, which sounds like a generous arrangement and was in practice the source of centuries of trouble. Because Zeus lived on Olympus, and Olympus stood on the earth, and the earth belonged to everybody, which meant that whenever Zeus behaved as though the whole world were his to command, his brothers had grounds to object, and they did object. We will hear Poseidon object at length, with a fury that shakes the seafloor. That is the political architecture of everything that follows. A throne at the center, 2 brothers with kingdoms of their own and old grievances, a queen with a legitimate claim to authority and no power to enforce it against her husband. Children born from a dozen different mothers, each of them a rival to the others, each of them granted a portion of the world by the king's own hand. Rivals, allies, lovers, enemies, all of them permanently unable to die, all of them seated in the same shining hall for eternity. 12 thrones, 1 family. Let us go and meet them. Everything begins with a father who ate his children. The story of Zeus does not start with Zeus. It starts with a prophecy and a terrified king, and the king is his father Cronus, youngest and cleverest of the elder gods, who had himself risen to power by mutilating and overthrowing his own father. That was the pattern. That was the family business. Sky is overthrown by sun. Sun becomes sky. Sun waits sleepless for the son who will overthrow him. Cronus had been warned. Both his parents had told him plainly that he was fated to be brought down by one of his own children, exactly as he had brought down his father. So when his wife and sister Rhea began bearing children, Cronus devised the simplest solution available to a being who cannot die and does not particularly care what his wife thinks. He waited by the birthing bed, and as each child emerged into the world, he took it and swallowed it whole and living. Hestia went down first, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. 5 children, alive inside their father, folded into the darkness of his body, neither dead nor free, aging without growing, waiting in a place with no sound and no light and no end to it. Consider that for a moment, because the Greeks certainly did. The first experience shared by 5 of the great gods of Olympus was captivity inside their own father. It is not a small thing. It is not decoration. Every one of those 5 carries something of it afterward, in their suspicion, in their sharp defensiveness, in the particular way they guard whatever portion of the world they are finally given. Rhea endured it 5 times. When she conceived the 6th, she went to her own parents, earth and sky, and begged them for a plan. They sent her away to Crete, to the island in the south, and there, in secret, in the hidden hollow of a mountain cave, she gave birth to a son. The traditions differ over which mountain. Some say Mount Dicte, some say Mount Ida. Both caves have their believers, and both have been shown to visitors for thousands of years, which tells you something about how badly people wanted the story to be true and locatable. Then Rhea did the oldest trick in the world. She took a stone, an ordinary stone, wrapped it carefully in swaddling cloth as though it were a newborn, and carried it to her husband. And Cronus, who had swallowed 5 living children without hesitation, swallowed the stone without checking. The infant hidden in the Cretan cave was raised in secrecy. The accounts vary in their details, and I want to give you several, because they are all lovely. In one, he was nursed by a goat named Amalthea, whose broken horn afterward became the horn of plenty. In another, nymphs raised him. In another, bees fed him honey in the dark. And in every version, there is the same wonderful problem and the same wonderful solution. A baby cries. A baby's cry carries. And the father of that baby was listening to the whole world with the anxiety of a man who knows exactly what is coming for him. So they gave him guards. A band of armed young spirits called the curettes stood around the cave mouth and danced. And as they danced, they beat their spears against their bronze shields. And the noise of that clashing rose up and filled the air and drowned out the sound of a god's child crying. Picture it, a dark cave on a Mediterranean mountainside, an infant. And around him, day after day, night after night, for years, a ring of armored dancers hammering metal on metal, so that his father would not hear him. That is the beginning of the reign of the king of the gods, not a coronation, a concealment. He grew, and he grew quickly, as gods do, and when he was grown he came back for his family. But he did not come with a weapon, not yet. He came with a cup. Here the tradition splits again, and both branches are worth knowing. In the most widespread version, Zeus took service in his father's household, disguised as a cupbearer, so that the one thing Cronus never suspected was the hand that poured his wine. In some accounts it was Earth herself who persuaded Cronus to disgorge what he had swallowed. In others it was Zeus alone, but the most commonly told version brings in a figure we will meet again in circumstances far darker, and her name is Metis. She was a daughter of Ocean, and her name means something close to cunning intelligence, practical wisdom, the ability to see the shape of a problem and the shape of its solution at the same time. Metis prepared a draught. Some say it was wine mixed with mustard, some say simply a drug. Zeus served it. His father drank it. And Cronus was violently, catastrophically sick. Out came the stone first, the last thing swallowed and the first thing returned. Zeus later set that stone up at Delphi, at the place the Greeks called the navel of the world, and travelers went to see it for centuries. And then, one after another, out came his brothers and sisters, whole alive and fully grown. Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, Hestia. Imagine the first thing they saw after that long-swallowed darkness. A younger brother they had never met, standing over the wreckage of their father, holding out a hand. They had every reason to follow him. He was the only one of them who had never been eaten. What followed is called the Titanomachy, and it lasted 10 years. On one side, Cronus and most of the elder gods, holding Mount Olympus. On the other, the 6 children of Cronus, holding Mount Olympus, which is where the mountain first enters the story as a fortress rather than a home. 10 years of war between beings who cannot die is not a war in any sense a human would recognize. It is an endurance contest. Nothing was resolved, nothing could be resolved, because neither side could destroy the other, and both sides were made of the raw material of the world itself. Mountains came apart, the sea boiled, and it went on, and neither side gained anything. The war was won by an act of political intelligence rather than strength. And this matters enormously for understanding Zeus. Deep beneath the earth, in the pit called Tartarus, their own grandfather had shut them away in horror at what they were, and Cronus, on taking power, had left them there. There were the Cyclopes, 3 enormous smiths with a single eye each. And there were the 100-handed ones, 3 beings of such overwhelming physical presence that even the gods found them difficult to look at, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. Zeus went down and freed them. That is the moment the war turned. Not a duel, not a heroic charge. A jailbreak, and an alliance offered to the discarded. The 100-handed ones came up out of the pit and did the only thing a being with 300 arms can meaningfully do, which is to pick up an entire mountainside and throw it. The old poetry describes a barrage of 300 boulders in flight at once, darkening the air. And the Cyclops, in gratitude, went to their forges and made a gift. They made the thunderbolt. It is easy to hear that word and feel nothing because we have all seen it 1,000 times in 1,000 pictures. So let me put it back where it belongs. Before that moment, Lightning was simply a thing that happened in the sky, terrifying and meaningless. After that moment, it had an owner. It became a weapon that a single individual could aim. The Cyclops gave Zeus the ability to reach out across any distance whatsoever and strike a specific target with a force nothing in existence could withstand. And they gave it to him alone, not to Poseidon, not to Hades. From that day, the difference between the king of the gods and his brothers was not birth order, it was not strength, it was not wisdom. It was that he was the one holding the lightning. He walked into the center of the battlefield and used it. The old accounts describe the whole world catching fire, the sea steaming, the earth cracking, the flames reaching so high that chaos itself was scorched. And the elder gods, who could not die, were broken. They were taken down into Tartarus and sealed there, in a place as far below the earth as the earth is below the sky. And the 100-handed ones were set at the gates as jailers, which is a beautiful and cruel detail. The prisoners became the guards. The beings nobody wanted were given the keys. Not every elder god was punished. Some had chosen the winning side, and Zeus, who was always a better politician than his father, rewarded them. He did not attempt to wipe out the old order entirely. He absorbed the useful parts of it. Some of the old gods kept their honors, some married into the new regime. One of them, Atlas, who had commanded on the losing side, was given a punishment specifically designed as a monument, made to stand at the edge of the world, holding the sky apart from the earth for eternity, so that everyone could see, forever, what happened. And then the three brothers drew lots for the world, and the sky came up in the hand of Zeus. So he had the throne. The question that occupies the rest of his existence, and the rest of tonight, is what he did with it, and whether he ever stopped being afraid. Because he did not stop. That is the thread running under everything else in the story of Zeus. He had overthrown his father exactly as his father had overthrown his grandfather, and the pattern was not a coincidence. It was a rule. 3 generations, 3 usurpations. Every ruler of the cosmos so far had been destroyed by his own child. Zeus knew the pattern better than anyone alive, because he was the one who had most recently completed it. The world he inherited was not quiet. The old earth goddess, furious that her children had been sealed under the ground, produced 2 further challenges. First came the giants, and the war against them, the Titanomachy, was fought with the whole assembled strength of the new gods and, according to prophecy, could only be won with the help of a mortal, which is how the greatest of the Greek heroes came to fight alongside the Olympians. And then, when that failed, she produced the last and worst of her children, Typhon. Every description of him strains and breaks. He was said to be so tall, his head brushed the stars, and so wide his arms reached from the eastern edge of the world to the western. From his shoulders grew 100 serpent heads, and from those heads came every sound that exists, the speech of gods, the bellowing of bulls, the roaring of lions, the hissing of snakes, all at once, all the time. Fire came out of his eyes. When he came up out of the earth and moved toward Olympus, the story tells us that the gods themselves ran. They fled the mountain. Some accounts, particularly the later Egyptian-influenced ones, have them fleeing all the way to Egypt and hiding there in the shapes of animals. And Zeus stood. That is his one great unambiguous moment, and it is worth honoring it, because we are about to spend a long time on his failures. Everything else about him is complicated. This is not. The king stayed on the mountain and fought the thing that had emptied it. He fought with the thunderbolt and with a sickle. In some accounts, the very sickle that had brought down his grandfather. In one version, he is initially defeated. His sinews cut out of his body and hidden in a cave, and he has to be rescued and restored before he can fight again, which is a startling image. The king of the gods lying helpless and disassembled, while a monster wears the sky. But in every version he wins in the end. He drives Typhon down and buries him. Some say beneath the island of Sicily, under the volcano, and that the mountain's smoke is his breath, and its shaking is his struggling. Others say he was cast into the pit with the rest. After that, nothing ever seriously threatened the throne from outside again. Every threat afterward came from inside the family. So what, precisely, was he god of? The simple answer is the sky, and it is not wrong, but it is far too small. The Greeks used the word for sky and the word for day and the name of this god almost interchangeably in some contexts. His name is one of the oldest words in the whole family of European languages, and it is related to words meaning to shine, and to the sky father of much older traditions far to the east. When a Greek said the name, part of what he was saying was simply bright daylight. Zeus is what is above you. He is rain when the crop needs it, and hail when it does not. He is the wind that fills a sail. He is the thunder that arrives when you are far from shelter. But the Greeks did something more interesting than making a weather god. They made the weather into a court of law. Zeus was the guardian of oaths. If you swore something and broke it, it was his business. He was the guardian of guests and hosts, and this one is worth pausing on, because it is the single most important social rule in the entire Greek world. In a landscape of scattered cities, bad roads, and no police, the traveler was permanently at the mercy of whoever opened the door. So the Greeks made the stranger sacred. You fed him first and asked his name afterward. You gave him a gift when he left. And the god who watched over that arrangement, who noted every violation of it, was the one holding the lightning. This is why the whole Trojan War, in Greek eyes, was not fundamentally about a beautiful woman. It was about a guest who stole from his host. It was a crime against Zeus. He was the protector of suppliants, of anyone who came and knelt and asked for mercy. He was the god of kings and of the authority of kings. And he was, in the largest sense, the guarantor that the universe had rules at all. His daughters, in one account, were good order, justice, and peace. Whatever he did personally, and he did a great deal, the office he held was the office of order. Which brings us to the contradiction at the center of him, the one that has bothered readers for 2,500 years. The god of marriage law and sworn promises was the most spectacular oathbreaker in his own pantheon. The list of his lovers is enormous, and the list of his disguises is stranger still. He came to one woman as a shower of golden rain falling through the roof of the bronze chamber where her father had imprisoned her, and their son was the hero who beheaded the Gorgon. He came to another as a white bull, so gentle that she climbed onto his back, and then he swam with her across the sea to Crete, and their sons became kings, and later judges of the dead. He came as a swan. He came as an eagle. He came in the most brazen case of all, disguised as another goddess, in order to get close to one of her sworn companions. He came to a mortal woman wearing the exact face and voice of her own husband, and the child of that night was the strongest man who ever lived. Now it is easy to read all this as simple appetite, and the later poets certainly played it for comedy. But there is something structural underneath it, and it is worth seeing clearly. Almost every important family in the Greek world traced its bloodline back to Zeus. Almost every royal house, almost every founding hero, almost every city with a story about its own origins had a Zeus at the root of the family tree. These stories are not only about desire, they are about legitimacy. They are the reason a king in one valley could claim the right to rule a valley he had conquered. When a Greek city told the story of the god who came down and fathered its first ancestor, that city was making a political argument. They are also, and we should not soften this, stories in which a woman almost never consents in any way we would recognize, and in which she is very often destroyed afterward, usually by his wife rather than by him. We will come to the wife shortly. The children born of these unions matter to tonight's story because so many of them ended up in the hall. Of the 12 on the mountain, one is his brother, and one his sister, and one his wife. But the rest, every single one of the remaining 8, is his child. That is the true architecture of Olympus. It is not a council of equals who happen to fall in together. It is a father surrounded by his own offspring, each of them given a piece of the world by his hand, each of them holding that piece at his pleasure. And he made sure they never forgot the difference in strength. There is a moment in the old war poetry where the assembled gods are quarreling and threatening to intervene against his orders. And Zeus tells them, quite calmly, to try something. Hang a golden chain from the sky, he says. All of you take hold of it, every god and goddess together, and pull with everything you have. You will not shift me. But if I decide to pull, I will haul all of you up, and the earth and the sea along with you, and I will tie the chain round the peak of Olympus, and leave the entire world dangling in mid-air. Nobody took him up on it. Yet for all that, he was not unbounded. And this is the part people most often miss. Above the king sat fate. There is a devastating passage in which Zeus watches a mortal he loves. his own son walking toward the death that has been allotted to him. And Zeus considers saving him. And another god says, in effect, you can if you like, but none of us will ever accept the ordering of the world again if you do. And the king of the gods weeps tears of blood onto the earth and lets his son die. That is the shape of his power. He can do anything except unmake the rules that make him king. He was also, at least once, very nearly overthrown, and the plot came from inside the hall. His wife, his brother of the sea, and his own favorite daughter conspired together, caught him sleeping and bound him with 100 knots. It took an outsider, one of the sea deities, fetching one of the 100-handed ones up from the deep to break the conspiracy. The jailers he had appointed all those years ago saved him, and his punishment of his wife for her part in it was a public humiliation we will come to when we meet her, hanging in the empty air between earth and sky, with anvils tied to her feet. There is one more relationship that defines him, and it is with the mortal world. Zeus did not like humanity very much. When a clever elder god tricked him during a sacrifice, arranging the portions so that the gods would receive bones dressed in fat, while men kept the meat, Zeus responded by taking fire away from human beings. When that same god stole fire back, hidden in the hollow of a fennel stalk, and carried it down to us, Zeus chained him to a rock and sent an eagle to eat his liver every day for eternity, the liver growing back each night so that the punishment could never finish. And then, because that was not enough, he made a gift for humanity in return. He had the smith god shape the first woman out of earth and water, had every god contribute a quality to her, and sent her down with a sealed jar. When it was opened, every sickness and sorrow and hardship in the world came out of it, and only one thing remained inside, caught under the lid: hope, which the Greeks, being Greeks, never quite decided was a mercy, or the cruelest part of the joke. He also, in the oldest accounts, tried to wipe us out entirely with a flood, and permitted one just man and his wife to survive in a wooden chest, and they repopulated the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, and the stones became people, rock-born, hard, made for enduring. That is what the Greeks thought we were. So there he is, the king, sky and thunder, and law and rain, a guarantor of oaths who broke his own constantly, a father of more of the gods in that hall than any other, terrified of prophecy, generous to allies, patient in politics, catastrophic in love, capable of weeping over a son he could have saved, and choosing the order of the universe instead. And of all the things he ever feared, the one he feared most immediately was sitting beside him. Hera was born before him. That is the first thing to understand, and the Greeks understood it perfectly well. She was a daughter of Cronus and Rhea, older than her husband, one of the 5 who went down into their father's throat and waited in that dark, and came back out of it fully grown. When Zeus finally took the throne, she was already there, already a queen in her own right, already worshipped in some parts of the Greek world, with a depth and antiquity that suggests her cult may be older than his. That is the tension at the heart of her. She is not a consort who was elevated. She is a power in her own right who was married. Her worship was ancient and enormous. On the island of Samos and at Argos in the Peloponnese, she was not simply an important goddess. She was the goddess, with vast temples and festivals that structured the whole civic year. Some of the earliest monumental temples in the entire Greek world were built for her. She was the Sky Queen, the Great Lady, and her sacred animals give you her character straight away. The cow, because she was the nourisher and because the oldest poetry describes her eyes as wide and dark and steady like a cow's. The peacock, for splendor and display, and those 100 watching eyes on the tail, which we will explain shortly. The lion, the pomegranate, for fertility inside marriage. And her domain was marriage itself, not romance, which belonged to another goddess entirely and which Hera regarded with something close to contempt. Not desire, marriage, the legal, binding, public institution, the household, the wife's authority within it, the legitimacy of children, the honor owed to a woman who has entered into that contract in good faith. Every Greek bride prayed to her, every wedding was under her protection. Now hold that in your mind and consider what happened to her. The courtship is told in a way that sounds charming until you look at it properly. Zeus wanted her and she refused him. She refused him repeatedly, and at length, guarding her independence, and this went on for a considerable time. So he changed his approach. He waited for bad weather, and then he transformed himself into a cuckoo. a small bedraggled bird, half dead with cold, and let himself be found. Hera, who loved living things, picked the shivering bird up and held it against her breast to warm it. And then he changed back. The stories are usually delicate about what followed. What they all agree on is that afterward, to protect her honor, she agreed to the marriage. She was tricked into her own wedding by the god of oaths using a false shape. That is where the goddess of the marriage bond began. There followed, we are told, a honeymoon of 300 years, hidden away from the sight of all the other gods, during which Zeus was faithful to her and to nobody else. 300 years of peace. That figure is not decoration either. It is there to measure the fall, to tell you exactly how far she had to come down. Because after that, he was never faithful again. The catalogue of what Hera did in response is long and it is brutal, and I want to walk through it honestly because she is too often flattened into a nagging wife in a comedy, and that is a serious misreading of a serious goddess. Take Io, a priestess in her own temple at Argos. Zeus pursued her. When Hera came looking, he transformed the girl into a white heifer and stood there innocently beside her. Hera, who was nobody's fool, admired the lovely animal and asked her husband to give it to her as a present. And Zeus, who could not refuse without confessing, handed over his lover. Hera tied the heifer up and set a guard on her. And the guard she chose was Argus, called the All-Seeing, a creature covered in 100 eyes, of which only some ever closed at once. There was no moment, day or night, when Io was not being watched. Zeus eventually sent Hermes to free her, and Hermes talked and played music until every single eye had at last shut, and then killed him. Hera took the 100 eyes of her dead servant and set them into the tail of the peacock, so that she would never be without them. And she was not finished. She sent a gadfly to torment the heifer, and drove Io wandering across the whole known world in agony, across the sea that still bears a version of her name, all the way to Egypt, before she was finally allowed to return to her own shape. Take Leto, who was carrying Zeus's twins. Hera decreed that no place on the solid earth that saw the light of the sun should give her shelter to give birth, and Leto wandered, enormous with child, and every land turned her away in fear. We will come back to how that ended, because it ends with 2 of the 12 thrones being filled. Take Semele, a princess of Thebes, pregnant by Zeus. Hera came to her disguised as an old nurse, and did not threaten her, and did not curse her. She simply planted a doubt. "Are you certain," she asked, "that he is really who he says he is? You should ask him to appear to you as he appears to his wife." And because Zeus had sworn an unbreakable oath to give the girl anything she asked, he could not refuse. He came to her in his full divinity, and the mortal woman was destroyed instantly by the sight of him. Hera killed her with a question. Take Callisto, one of the sworn companions of the huntress goddess, who Zeus approached wearing the shape of that very goddess. When it emerged that she was pregnant, she was transformed into a bear. Some accounts blame Hera, some blame the huntress. Some blame Zeus. She was eventually placed among the stars, and there is a bitter footnote in some versions in which Hera persuades the sea gods never to let that constellation sink below the horizon and rest in the water, so that even in the sky she gets no peace. And then there is Heracles. That feud is the longest in Greek mythology, and it began before he was born. Zeus, who had fathered him on a mortal woman, boasted that a child of his blood was about to be born who would rule the surrounding people. Hera made him swear to it. Then she went and delayed the birth of Heracles, and hurried forward the birth of another child of his line, so that the promise landed on a lesser cousin. And the strongest man in the world spent his life taking orders from a weaker one. She sent serpents into the infant's cradle, and he strangled them. And later, at the height of his life, she sent a madness upon him, and in that madness he killed his own wife and his own children. The famous labors were the penance for that. Every one of those legendary tasks exists because of Hera. She is the engine of the greatest hero cycle the Greeks ever produced. Only at the very end, when his mortal part had burned away and he was taken up to the mountain as a god, did she relent, and she gave him her own daughter as a bride. Now, was any of this justified? The Greeks themselves clearly found this uncomfortable and interesting, and it is worth being fair to her. Hera is the goddess of the marriage contract, and she is married to the one being in the universe who breaks that contract more often and more flagrantly than anyone else, and she cannot leave and she cannot win, and she cannot die. Her rage is the rage of someone whose entire divine function is being publicly desecrated by her own husband forever in front of everyone. She cannot punish him. He holds the lightning, so she punishes what she can reach. And she did try, once, to punish him directly. The conspiracy we mentioned earlier, where Zeus was bound in 100 knots while he slept, was hers. It failed. His answer was to hang her from the sky by a golden chain with anvils lashed to her ankles, in full view of the assembled gods, and to leave her there. Any god who moved to help her was thrown off the mountain, which is precisely what happened to her own son, and we will come to him and to his very long memory. She did not stop. In the great war poetry she is relentless. She hates Troy with a personal, unwavering hatred, and she works ceaselessly for its destruction throughout the entire war, in defiance of her husband's stated will. In one famous sequence, she decides that the only way to get Zeus off the battlefield is to distract him. So she bathes and anoints herself, and borrows from the goddess of love a certain embroidered band that carries in it all longing and all persuasion. And she goes to her husband on the peak of Mount Ida, and she lies to him beautifully, and he is so overcome that he lists for her, out loud, every woman he has ever desired, in order to explain that she surpasses them all. It is one of the most astonishing scenes in ancient literature, a wife weaponizing her husband's own weakness while he compliments her by naming all his affairs. And it works. He sleeps, and while he sleeps, the tide of the war turns. Her hatred of Troy had a cause, and it brings us to the beginning of that whole catastrophe. At a divine wedding, the goddess of strife threw a golden apple among the guests marked for the fairest. 3 claimed it: Hera, the goddess of wisdom and war, and the goddess of love. Zeus, showing rare good sense, refused to judge and sent the case to a mortal, a prince of Troy. Each goddess offered a bribe. Hera offered him rule over all of Asia, power, empire, the largest thing she could give, because sovereignty was what she understood. He chose the goddess of love instead and took the most beautiful woman in the world, who was already married. Hera never forgave, and a city burned for it. She was, for all this, a real and beloved goddess to real people. Women prayed to her at their weddings and in childbirth, and when their households were in danger. She was the protector of the legitimate wife in a world that offered wives very little protection. And when you understand that, the wrath makes a different kind of sense. She is not petty. She is the outraged dignity of every woman in that world who had no recourse, given the power of the sky and no way to use it, on the one who deserved it. She had children with Zeus: Ares, Hebe, who was youth itself and poured the wine; Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, whose services she could withhold; and, by some accounts, one son she made entirely alone, without any father at all, out of pure spite, to prove that she did not need him. That son crashed into the sea, and we will meet him before the night is over. If Hera resented the throne from beside it, Poseidon resented it from a kingdom of his own, and he was considerably harder to ignore. He was the second of the brothers, older than Zeus, swallowed like the rest and vomited up like the rest. When the lots were drawn, he took the sea, and there is a moment in the old war poetry that tells you exactly how he felt about the arrangement. A messenger comes down to him with an order from Zeus, telling him to withdraw from the battlefield, and Poseidon erupts. "We are 3 brothers," he says, "all born of the same father and the same mother. The world was divided into 3 parts, and each of us got one. I got the grey sea, Hades got the darkness, Zeus got the sky. The earth and Olympus are common to all of us. So let him keep to his own third and stop giving me orders as though I were one of his children. I am not afraid of him. Let him frighten his own sons and daughters." He backs down in the end, complaining bitterly, and only because he is reminded of the older right of the elder brother and the disgrace of open war among the gods. But it is the closest thing to a constitutional crisis that Olympus ever has. And you should keep it in mind through everything else, because Poseidon is the one god in that hall who genuinely does not think of himself as a subject. His worship is very old. There is good evidence for him in the Bronze Age records of the Greek world, and in some of those earliest traces he appears to have been an even greater figure than he later became, possibly the chief god of certain places. Something happened in the centuries between, and the sky god rose, and the sea god was moved into second position. The resentment in the story may be an echo of that. His domain is 3 things: and the combination looks strange until you understand the landscape. He is god of the sea, he is god of earthquakes, and he is god of horses. The sea is obvious. Greece is a country of islands and peninsulas and long jagged coastlines, and for most of Greek history, the sea was the road. It carried grain and timber and armies and news. It also drowned people constantly, without warning and without reason. A god who could calm it or raise it was the difference between a fleet arriving and a fleet ceasing to exist. Sailors sacrificed to him before every voyage of consequence. The earthquakes are less obvious to us, and were entirely obvious to them. Greece sits on a fault system and shakes regularly, and some of those shakes have leveled entire cities within a minute. The Greeks reasoned that the sea surrounded and undercut the land, and that if something moved down there, the land above would move too. So the god of the water was the god who could take the ground out from under you. His most common title in the old poetry is the Earth Shaker. When he was angry with a city, he did not send storms. He simply pulled the foundations apart. The horses take more explaining. Partly it is the look of the thing, the way a line of breakers comes in with a rolling white crest, and Greek poets did compare waves to running horses. But the connection runs deeper. In some accounts, Poseidon created the first horse, striking it out of the rock. In others, he pursued Demeter, who fled him by turning herself into a mare and hiding in a herd, whereupon he turned himself into a stallion. And from that union came a divine horse. He was worshipped in Arcadia and elsewhere specifically as the horse god, and there is something exactly right about it. The horse is the other great force that the Greeks partly harnessed and never fully controlled, enormously powerful, essential to war and travel, and capable of killing you without malice at any moment. That is the sea. That is an earthquake. That is Poseidon. His weapon was the trident, a three-pronged spear that was in origin a working fishing spear used for tuna. It was made for him by the same Cyclopes who forged the thunderbolt. With it he could split rock, raise storms, open springs, and crack the seafloor. His palace stood in the depths off the coast of Euboea, gold and shining, and his queen was Aphrodite, a sea goddess in her own right, one of the daughters of the old man of the sea. She had refused him and fled and hidden herself away at the edge of the world. And he sent messengers after her, and it was a dolphin who found her, and Poseidon set that dolphin among the stars in gratitude. Their son was Triton, who had the tail of a fish and blew on a great conch shell to raise or calm the waves. But it is his rivalries that shape the map of Greece, and every one of them is a story about losing. The most famous is the contest for Athens. The city on the rock had no patron yet, and two gods wanted it, Poseidon and Athena. Zeus, to prevent open fighting, ordered a contest. Each would give the city a gift, and the city would choose. According to the fullest surviving account, the first king of Athens, a strange figure with the lower body of a serpent, was to judge. Poseidon went first. He struck the rock of the Acropolis with a trident, and a spring burst up out of solid stone. That is not a small gift. It is the sea itself, arriving at the highest point of the city, an unmistakable declaration that this place would be a naval power and would grow rich on the water. There was only one problem which the story is careful to note. The water was salt. It was a display of power that could not be drunk. Then Athena planted an olive tree, and the city chose the tree. It gave them fruit to eat, and oil to cook with, and to burn in lamps, and to sell abroad, and wood, and it would grow for centuries on ground too poor for anything else. It was not spectacular. It was useful. And the Athenians, who told this story about themselves for 1,000 years, were telling you exactly what they thought of themselves, that they were the people who chose the practical gift over the impressive one. Poseidon flooded the plain in fury. And yet, and this is the detail people miss, they did not banish him. On the Acropolis, in the temple shared between them, visitors were shown a well of salt water and marks on the floor said to have been left by the trident, kept as sacred objects. The Athenians honored the god they had rejected, right there beside the goddess who beat him, because you do not insult the sea when your entire empire floats on it. It was not the only contest he lost. He claimed Argos and lost it to Hera, and dried up the rivers of that country in revenge, which is why the Greeks said, "The rivers of the Argolid run empty in summer." He claimed Corinth against the sun god, and got only the isthmus, the narrow neck of land with water on both sides, while his rival took the citadel above. And then there is Troy. Poseidon and Apollo, for reasons the sources give differently, were once compelled to serve a mortal king for a year, and in that service Poseidon built the great walls of Troy with his own hands. When the year ended, the king refused to pay them, refused and threatened them and sent them away. Poseidon never forgot it, and when the war finally came, he stood against Troy with a personal hatred, working for the destruction of walls he had built himself. His anger is never abstract. It is always about a debt, which brings us to the one story where his anger becomes the whole plot of an epic. When Odysseus was trapped in the cave of the Cyclops, he blinded the giant to escape, and the giant was Poseidon's son. And Odysseus, sailing away, could not resist shouting his own real name back across the water so that the blinded creature would know who had done it. The Cyclops raised his hands to his father and asked that this man never come home, and if he must come home, that he come late, and broken, and alone, and having lost everyone, and find trouble waiting in his house. Every single element of that prayer came true. The whole of the wandering, 10 years of it, is Poseidon collecting. He was not gentle in love either. The Gorgon Medusa, in the version most people know, was a beautiful woman who served as a priestess in Athena's temple, and Poseidon took her there, in the temple itself. And the goddess, whose sanctuary had been defiled, could not punish a fellow Olympian, so she punished the woman, snakes for hair, and a face that turned men to stone. When she was finally killed, the winged horse that sprang from her blood was Poseidon's child. The sources vary on how consensual any of it was, and the older ones are less specific than the famous Roman retelling. But the shape of the story is consistent, and it is a story about a powerful god acting and a less powerful woman paying. He fathered a great many children, and it is striking how many of them are monstrous or violent. The Cyclops, giants, brutal kings, a pair of enormous twins who tried to storm Olympus by piling mountains on top of each other. Even his gift of a beautiful white bull to a king of Crete ended in catastrophe when the king kept the animal instead of sacrificing it. And Poseidon's revenge was to make the queen fall in love with it, and the child of that was the Minotaur. But he could be a father in the ordinary sense too. Theseus, the great hero of Athens, was said in some accounts to be his son, and there is a lovely moment where the young man, challenged to prove it, dives from a ship into the open sea and comes back up holding a gold ring, and in some versions wearing a crown given to him by his father's wife in the palace below. That is Poseidon, older brother, second kingdom, permanent grievance, builder of walls and destroyer of them, the god you thank when you get home and blame when you do not, immensely powerful and never once the king. Of the 6 children Cronus swallowed, we have now heard from 3. There is a 4th still to come, and her story is the quietest and the saddest of all of them, because she is the only one whose grief stopped the world. Demeter's name almost certainly contains the word for mother. The first part is disputed and has been argued over for a very long time, but the second part is not in doubt. Whoever she was originally, she was the mother. She was another of the swallowed 6, sister to Zeus and Poseidon and Hera, and her portion of the world was the grain. Not agriculture in the broad modern sense, not gardens or orchards, but specifically the cultivated cereal crop, the barley and the wheat, the thing that stood in the fields and turned gold, and was cut down and threshed and ground and became bread. In a world where a bad year meant starvation, and where almost everybody's survival depended directly on how the grain came up, that made her arguably the most immediately important goddess in Greece for the average person. You might go your entire life without needing the god of the sea. You needed Demeter every single day. She is usually pictured mature, calm, crowned holding sheaves of grain and sometimes a torch, and her presence in the old poetry is dignified and slightly apart. She does not scheme. She does not take lovers casually. She has no interest in the politics of the hall, and that detachment makes what happens to her all the more devastating, because when Demeter finally does act against Olympus, she does it by simply refusing to work, and the entire cosmos nearly ends. She had a daughter. The girl's name was Persephone, though people were often careful about saying it, and her father was Zeus. The fullest ancient telling of what happened is a long hymn composed around 600 years before the Common Era, and it is one of the most beautiful pieces of surviving Greek poetry. It begins with a girl in a meadow, playing with the daughters of the ocean, gathering flowers, roses, crocuses, violets, irises, hyacinths, And then, one flower she has never seen before, a narcissus of impossible size, 100 blooms on a single root, and the scent of it filling the whole sky and the sea. The poem tells you outright that the earth grew it deliberately, at the will of Zeus, as a snare for the girl. She reached for it with both hands, and the ground opened. Out of the opening came a chariot drawn by immortal horses, and the Lord of the Dead, he took hold of her and pulled her down into the chariot and drove back into the earth, and she screamed for her father as she went. And the earth closed over her. Two beings heard the scream. One was Hecate in her cave. The other was the sun, who sees everything, and nobody else. Not the nymphs she had been playing with, not her mother who was elsewhere, and heard nothing but a faint echo of a cry from the mountains. The abduction was arranged. That is the part that gives this story its terrible weight. Zeus knew. Zeus had given his daughter to his brother without telling the girl's mother, and the flower in the meadow was the bait. The hymn says it plainly. This is not a crime committed against the will of Olympus. It is a decision taken in the hall and executed on a child. Demeter searched for 9 days. She lit torches and would not eat, and would not wash, and would not rest, and she went across the whole earth looking. On the 10th day Hecate came to her and said, "I heard a voice, but I did not see who it was." And together they went to the sun, and the sun told her the truth, plainly and without much sympathy. It was Hades. Zeus arranged it. He is a perfectly respectable husband, being your own brother and lord of a third of the world. So really you should be content. Demeter was not content. And here she does something that transforms the story. She does not go to war. She could not win a war against Zeus, and she knew it. Instead, she walks away. She leaves Olympus entirely, disguises herself as an old woman far past childbearing, and disappears into the mortal world. She came at last to Eleusis, a small place about 14 miles west of Athens, and sat down beside a well in the shade of an olive tree. The daughters of the local king came to draw water and found an old woman there, and being well brought up, they spoke kindly to her and asked her story. She told them a lie, a good one, about pirates and escape, and said her name was Doso, which means something like giver, and they took her home to their mother. What follows is one of the small perfect scenes in ancient literature. The queen offers the old woman the best chair. Demeter refuses it and stands there with her eyes lowered and will not speak and will not smile until a serving woman named Iambe begins to joke with her. We are not told what the jokes were. Scholars generally suspect they were obscene, and the goddess, who had not smiled since her daughter vanished, laughed. Then she took a drink of barley water flavored with mint, refusing wine, and that drink became part of the rites afterward. They gave her the queen's infant son to nurse. His name was Demophoon, and the boy began to thrive extraordinarily, growing like something divine. And the reason was that every night, in secret, Demeter was anointing him with ambrosia and laying him down in the heart of the fire to burn the mortality out of him. She was going to make him a god. She had lost a child, and she was, quietly, methodically, in the dark, making another one immortal, so that she could never lose him. And the boy's mother saw. She came in one night, saw her baby lying in the flames, and screamed. Demeter took the child out of the fire and set him down on the ground, and she was terribly angry. And she said, in effect, "You foolish people, you do not know your own good fortune. Your son would have been deathless and ageless forever. Now he cannot be. He will have honor because he lay in my arms, but he will die like the rest of you." And then she threw off the disguise. Age fell away from her. Beauty spread around her. Light came out of her body and filled the house, and the mortals fell down in terror. "Build me a temple," she said, "and I will teach you my rites myself." They built it. She sat in it, and then she stopped the world. That year, nothing grew. Not a single seed came up out of the ground. The oxen dragged the plows across the fields, and the fields stayed bare. The hymn says she made the cruelest and most terrible year for humanity that there had ever been, and that she would have destroyed the entire human race by famine, and with it, the honors and sacrifices that the gods depend upon. That is her weapon. Not lightning, not earthquakes, simply the withdrawal of her consent and the discovery that the machinery of the universe does not run without her. Zeus sent messengers. He sent the gods one after another with gifts and honors and offers, and she refused every one of them and said she would never set foot on Olympus again, nor let anything grow until she saw her daughter with her own eyes. So he gave in. He sent Hermes down into the dark, and here the story does its final, subtle, unforgettable turn. Hades receives the messenger courteously and agrees at once to let the girl go. He is not portrayed as a monster. He tells Persephone that she may return to her mother and that she should not be too downhearted about him as a husband, since he is her father's own brother and a great lord in his own right. And then, as she is leaving, he gives her something to eat, a pomegranate seed. In some versions he gives it to her stealthily, in others she simply eats it. She eats it, and that settles everything because anyone who has eaten the food of the dead belongs to that place. The compromise reached is the one everybody knows. She spends a portion of the year below and the rest above. The accounts differ on the proportion, a third in some, half in others. When she comes up, her mother rejoices, and the earth turns green, and the grain rises. When she goes down, Demeter grieves, and the world goes cold and barren, and waits. It is an origin story for the seasons, and it works perfectly well as one, but that is the smallest thing it is. What it really addresses is the fact that every single person listening tonight will one day lose someone into the ground, and that the loss is permanent, and also, somehow, not total. The girl comes back, not forever and not unchanged. She comes back as a queen of the dead who eats at both tables. Grief does not end. It becomes seasonal. And there was more to it than a story, because Demeter kept her promise about the rites. What was established at Eleusis became the Eleusinian Mysteries, and they ran for something close to 2,000 years, one of the longest continuously observed religious institutions in European history. Thousands were initiated from all over the Greek and later the Roman world, slaves and women included, which was remarkable. They walked the road from Athens to Eleusis in procession, fasted, drank the barley and mint drink, and entered the hall. And we do not know what happened in there. That is the astonishing thing. Every initiate was bound to absolute silence, and across 2 millennia, in a culture that wrote down everything, the secret held. We have hints. We know something was shown. We know it involved darkness, and then a great light, and something to do with grain. We know that people who went through it came out changed, and that ancient writers, otherwise skeptical people, said afterwards that they no longer feared death. Whatever it was, Demeter is the one who gave it. The grieving mother, in her fury and her mercy, handed humanity something to hold on to. She was not only gentle. Ask the man named Erysichthon who cut down a sacred grove of hers for timber, ignoring the warnings, and killed the tree that a nymph lived inside. Demeter's punishment was hunger, not ordinary hunger, but an insatiable, bottomless, permanent famine inside one man. He ate everything in his house and then sold everything in his house to buy food, and then sold his own daughter, and in the end he devoured himself. The goddess of bread taught a man what it means to have none. And she was never entirely reconciled to Olympus. She goes back. In the end, she lets the grain grow. But something in her stays down at Eleusis, in the dark hall, with the mortals who are also going to lose people. That is the last of Cronus's children on the mountain. Everyone else in that hall is a generation younger, and every one of them is a child of Zeus. So the rest of tonight is the story of what a frightened king does with his own offspring. And it begins with the one he was most afraid of, who turned out to be the one he loved best. Remember Metis? She was the one who mixed the draught that made Cronus give up his children. She was cunning intelligence itself, the practical, improvising, problem-solving kind of cleverness that the Greeks valued above almost anything. Zeus took her as his first wife, and then he heard a prophecy. It said that Metis would bear children of surpassing quality. First, a daughter, equal to her father in strength and wisdom, and then a son, who would become king of gods and men. Zeus had been waiting for that sentence his entire life. His grandfather had heard a version of it. His father had heard a version of it. Both had tried to prevent it, and both had failed. And both had failed specifically because of what they did to try to stop it. His grandfather shoved his children back into the earth, and the earth armed the youngest of them against him. His father swallowed his children, and the one that got away came back with a cup. So Zeus did something slightly different, and it was the difference between him and them. He did not swallow the child. He swallowed the mother. Metis was pregnant at the time. He tricked her, by most accounts, into making herself small, playing on her own love of shape-shifting and cleverness. and then he took her into himself entirely. And she did not die, because gods do not, and she did not leave, because there was nowhere to go. She simply became part of him. The old poetry says she stayed in his belly and advised him from there, telling him good and evil, and that this is where his own famous wisdom came from. He did not merely eliminate a rival, he absorbed her. That single act is the reason no fourth generation ever overthrew the throne. The son was never born. The cycle stopped inside Zeus's own body. But the daughter had already been conceived. Sometime later, Zeus developed a headache, not an ordinary headache, a splitting, roaring agony that made the king of the gods cry out until the sky rang with it, and he asked for help. The accounts differ on who came, and I will give you the main versions, because the image is worth having twice. In the most common one, it was Hephaestus, the smith, with his double-headed axe. In others, it was the Titan who stole fire. Whoever it was, they swung and they split open the skull of the king of the gods. And Athena came out. Not an infant, not helpless. She emerged fully grown and fully armored, with a spear in her hand and a helmet on her head, and the first thing she did was shout a war cry so enormous that, in one account, the sky shook and the sea rose in waves, and the sun stopped his chariot in the middle of the sky to watch. Nothing in Greek myth is accidental, and every part of that image means something. She has no mother in any ordinary sense, because her mother is inside her father. She is born from the head, which is where thinking happens. She is born armed, which means she was never innocent and never had to become dangerous. She simply always was. And she is born as the direct result of a prophecy that Zeus successfully outmaneuvered, which makes her a monument to his single greatest political victory. Naturally, she was his favorite. The relationship between Zeus and Athena is the only genuinely untroubled one on that mountain. She is the only god permitted to use the thunderbolt. She has access to the Aegis, that terrible goatskin storm shield that shakes the courage out of armies, which was in origin her father's, and which she carries with the head of the Gorgon fixed to the front of it. She argues with him, and he indulges her. When every other god is defying him or plotting against him or sulking, Athena is at his side. And it is not servility, it is genuine alignment. Of all his children, she is the one who thinks the way he thinks. Her domain is wide and it is worth taking apart carefully, because the modern shorthand of wisdom and war misses most of it. She is the goddess of war, yes, but of a very particular kind. She is not battle, she is generalship. She is the campaign that was planned properly, the siege engine that worked, the ambush laid in the right place, the retreat conducted in good order. Her half-brother Ares is the other war god, and the distinction between them is one of the sharpest pieces of thinking in Greek religion. Ares is what war feels like from inside it. Athena is what war looks like from above it. Ares is the noise and the blood and the panic and the loss of self. Athena is the decision. And the Greeks, who fought constantly and knew exactly what they were talking about, made it entirely clear which of the two they preferred. Athena beats Ares every single time they meet. Every time. In the great war poem, she knocks him flat with the boundary stone she picks up off the ground, and stands over him laughing at him for being a fool. She is also the goddess of craft, and this is not a separate thing but the same thing seen differently. Her wisdom is not philosophical, it is applied, it is knowing how. She is the patroness of weaving, of pottery, of carpentry, of shipbuilding, of the working of metal into useful shapes. She taught the making of the bridle. She oversaw the building of the first great ship. She is the intelligence that is in your hands as much as in your head. The skill of the craftsman who has done a thing 10,000 times and can now do it without thinking. That is a kind of wisdom the Greeks respected enormously and we tend to undervalue. And she is a virgin goddess, permanently, absolutely, by her own choice. She is not the mother of anyone, with one very strange exception, which we will come to when we reach the god of the forge. She takes no lovers. This is not a small detail attached to her. It is close to the center of her, and it goes with something else, which is that she is the only major goddess who is entirely at home in the world of men and entirely uninterested in being either wife or mother. That combination made her, for the Greeks, a slightly uncanny figure. Grey-eyed, they called her. Sometimes bright-eyed or owl-eyed. And the owl is her bird for exactly that reason, the creature with the enormous, unblinking stare that sees in the dark. Now the myths, and there are, Two that everyone knows, and both of them are harder than their reputations. The first is Arachne, a mortal woman, a weaver of extraordinary skill, who said out loud that she was better at the loom than Athena, and would happily prove it. The goddess came to her disguised as an old woman and gave her a chance to take it back, and Arachne refused. So they wove. Athena's work showed the gods in their power and majesty, and around the edges she wove small scenes of mortals who had challenged gods and been destroyed for it, which is about as clear a warning as it is possible to put into cloth. And Arachne wove the gods behaving badly. Every seduction, every deception, every abduction, every disguise, all of it rendered perfectly. And it was perfect. That is the point. The account most people know says the work was flawless, that not even a jealous goddess could find anything wrong with it. Athena, either enraged by the skill or enraged by the subject matter, tore the weaving apart and struck the girl. Arachne hanged herself. And Athena, in something that is presented as pity and functions as a life sentence, turned the rope into a thread and the girl into a spider, so that she and all her descendants would hang and spin forever. I should note here that the fully developed version of that story comes to us from a Roman poet writing centuries after the classical Greek period, and the older Greek tradition around Arachne is much thinner. The spider was always associated with weaving. The elaborate contest may be a later literary creation. It is a magnificent story either way, but it is worth knowing which layer it comes from. The second is Medusa, and we touched on it already from the sea god's side. In the version that has come down to most of us, Medusa was a beautiful mortal woman serving as a priestess in Athena's temple. Poseidon violated her there, and Athena, unable or unwilling to punish a fellow Olympian for desecrating her own sanctuary, punished the victim instead, turning her hair to snakes and her gaze to stone. Again, honesty about sources matters. The oldest Greek accounts simply describe the Gorgons as monstrous from birth, 3 sisters, 2 immortal, and 1 not. The transformation story, the beautiful priestess and the temple, and the punishment, is largely a Roman development. Both traditions existed. The later one has become the dominant one in our time for reasons that are not hard to understand. What is consistent across all of them is what happened next. When Perseus was sent to bring back the Gorgon's head, Athena helped him. She gave him a shield polished to a mirror so that he could look at the reflection instead of the thing itself, which is an almost perfect emblem of her entire nature. You do not defeat the impossible problem by being braver. You defeat it by changing the angle of approach. And when he brought the head back, she fixed it to her own shield and wore it for the rest of time. That is what she does. She finds heroes and she gives them the one specific thing they need. She gave Bellerophon a golden bridle so that he could tame the winged horse. She stood over Heracles through the labors. She built or oversaw the ship for Jason, and above all, she loved Odysseus, and the reason she gives for loving him is one of the most revealing lines in Greek literature. She says, more or less, that they are alike, that both of them are clever, both of them are good at plans and disguises and lies, and that she cannot abandon him because he is the way he is. She loved a liar because he lied well. She is not a moral goddess. She is an excellent one. And she took Athens, which is the last thing to say about her. Against Poseidon's saltwater spring she planted the olive, and the city took her name and her gift, and built her a temple on the rock which is still standing, more or less, and which people still climb up to see. Inside it was an enormous statue of her in gold and ivory. Once a year the city carried a new woven robe up to her in a great procession, handmade, because she was the goddess of the loom. And the city that chose her went on to invent the theatre, the law court, and a form of democracy, and to lose a great war through arrogance, which she would have told them was inevitable if they had asked. The next 2 thrones were filled together by twins, and their story begins with the wrath of the queen we met earlier. Leto was a Titan's daughter, gentle in most accounts, and Zeus loved her, and she conceived. When Hera found out, she laid down a curse of exquisite precision. No place on the solid earth where the sun shone should give Leto shelter to give birth. So Leto walked, enormous, exhausted in labor, from country to country, and every land turned her away, because every land was afraid of the Queen of Heaven, and had every reason to be. In one telling, she is chased the whole way by a serpent, sent by Hera, that never lets her rest. In another, she was transformed into a quail to escape, and at last she came to Delos, Delos was a small barren rock in the middle of the Aegean, and it was not, at that time, fixed to anything. It drifted. It floated on the surface of the sea, unanchored, belonging nowhere, and because it was not part of the solid earth, it fell outside the terms of the curse. Two homeless things found each other, and the island, according to the hymn, was frightened, and asked for a promise before agreeing, because it feared that a great god born there might kick the rock apart in contempt for how poor it was. Leto swore that her son would build his first and greatest temple there, and Delos said yes. The birth was still not easy. Hera kept the goddess of childbirth beside her on Olympus and would not let her go, and Leto labored for 9 days and 9 nights. The other goddesses gathered around her, and eventually bribed Eileithyia away with a necklace of gold and amber and sent her down. Leto knelt and put her arms around a palm tree, and the birth came. And here the traditions differ in a way I find genuinely moving. In one widespread version, Artemis was born first, easily and quickly. And then, with her mother still in agony and unable to continue, the newborn goddess turned around and acted as midwife, and delivered her own twin brother. In other versions, she was born on a different island the day before and helped her mother across the water. Either way, the elder twin's very first act in the world was to bring the younger one into it. And that is why the huntress, who would never marry and never bear a child, was prayed to by women in labor for the whole of Greek history. When Apollo was born, the story says, everything on that grey rock turned to gold. The island blossomed, and Delos, which had wandered like its guest, was fixed permanently to the seabed and never drifted again. It became one of the great sanctuaries of the Greek world, so sacred that in the classical period it was ruled that nobody was permitted to be born or to die on the island at all, and the sick and the pregnant were ferried off it. Let us take the brother first. He was fed nectar and ambrosia, and grew to full stature in a matter of days, and almost immediately he went looking for a fight. At Delphi, on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, beside a spring, there was a great serpent called Python, an offspring of the earth. The accounts disagree about why Apollo went after it. Some say it had pursued his mother throughout her pregnancy at Hera's command. Some say he simply wanted what the serpent was guarding, because that spot was already sacred and already prophetic, and it had belonged to the earth long before any Olympian existed. He killed it with his bow, and then he took the place. This is one of the most important events in Greek religion, and it is usually told too quickly. Delphi was regarded as the center of the world. The story went that Zeus released 2 eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and they met there, and a carved stone marked the spot. For over 1,000 years, that sanctuary was the single most authoritative voice in the Greek world. Cities consulted it before founding colonies. Kings consulted it before wars. Individuals consulted it about marriages and illnesses and lawsuits. The Persian invasion, the Spartan constitution, the Athenian navy, all of them shaped by what came out of that room. And what came out of that room came out of a woman. The priestess was called the Pythia, named after the serpent, and she sat on a 3-legged stool over a cleft in the rock and spoke. Ancient writers said vapors rose from the ground and put her into a trance. That claim was dismissed by scholars for most of the 20th century, and then partly revived when geologists found fault lines under the temple capable of releasing light hydrocarbon gases, which is a lovely example of a myth turning out to have a flaw under it. Her answers were famously ambiguous. A king was told that if he went to war he would destroy a great empire, and he went, and he destroyed his own. Carved at the sanctuary were 2 short pieces of advice, which between them contain most of Greek ethics. Know yourself, and nothing in excess. So Apollo is the god of prophecy, but notice what kind. He does not give you the future. He gives you a sentence, and the sentence is true, and understanding it is your problem. Knowledge that arrives in a form you cannot quite use. That is characteristic of him. His other domains cluster around the same idea. He is the god of music, and specifically of the lyre, the stringed instrument that requires precision and tuning, as against the wild pipes of the countryside. He is the god of poetry and leader of the muses. He is the god of archery, of the arrow that strikes from a distance with perfect accuracy. He is the god of healing, and the father of the greatest healer who ever lived. He is the god of light, and in later periods, increasingly identified with the sun itself, though in the earliest Greek material the sun is a separate god entirely, and this identification is a later development. And he is the god of plague. That is not a contradiction they overlooked. It is the same power, the arrow that heals from a distance and the arrow that infects from a distance, are the same arrow. The Great War poem opens with him, furious because a Greek commander has insulted his priest, coming down from Olympus with his bow, and the poet says he came like nightfall. He shot the animals first, the mules and the dogs, and then he shot the men, and for 9 days the funeral fires burned continuously in the Greek camp. That is Apollo. Clarity, order, music, and a pestilence that comes out of a clear sky because somebody was disrespectful. His myths are full of a strange, cold pain, and most of them are about reaching for something and having it turn to something else in his hands. Daphne was a nymph. Apollo mocked the god of desire over the size of his bow, and in return was shot with an arrow that made him love her, while she was shot with one that made her flee. He chased her, and as he closed on her, she called out to her father, the river god, and she was turned into a laurel tree. He stood there holding a tree, and he took the laurel as his own emblem and made it into the crown given to victors, which is either tender or appalling, depending on how you look at it. Coronis was a mortal woman he loved who took another lover. A raven brought him the news, and Apollo, in his anger, scorched the bird from white to black forever. Coronis was killed, and as her body burned, Apollo snatched the unborn child from her, and that child was Asclepius, who became so skilled at medicine that he began raising the dead. Zeus killed him with a thunderbolt for breaking the boundary between mortal and immortal. And Apollo, unable to strike his father, killed the Cyclopes who made the bolt, and was punished by being sentenced to serve a mortal king as a herdsman for a year. Cassandra was a princess of Troy. He offered her the gift of prophecy in exchange for her love. She accepted the gift and then refused him, and he could not take the gift back because divine gifts cannot be revoked. So he added a condition. She would see the future truly, and no one would ever believe a word she said. She watched her city fall in advance and told everyone, and was treated as a madwoman, and it happened exactly as she had described. And then there is Marsyas, the satyr, who challenged him to a music contest and lost, and was flayed alive for it, and Midas, who judged another contest against the god of the wild and preferred the other player, and had his ears turned into a donkey's. You start to see the shape. Apollo is beautiful and radiant and civilized, and he is not kind. He is the god of everything the Greeks admired most about themselves, and he is proof that admiring yourself is not the same as being good. And his sister was worse, in the sense that she gave you no warning at all. Artemis was the elder twin by minutes or by a day, depending on the account, and she is one of the strangest and oldest figures on that mountain. Her worship reaches back a very long way, further back than the tidy Olympian family arrangement, into something wilder. She is not domesticated. She never was. There is a lovely story from a Hellenistic poet of Artemis as a small child sitting on her father's knee and asking for gifts. And what she asks for is a list, and the list is her entire character. She asks to remain unmarried forever. She asks for a bow and arrows. She asks for a short tunic she can run in, cut to the knee. She asks for 60 ocean nymphs as companions, and 20 more to look after her hunting dogs. She asks for all the mountains in the world, and says that any one city will do for the rest, because she will rarely come down to the cities anyway, and Zeus laughed and gave her everything. That is the deal. She gets the wilderness on condition that she stays out of the settled world, and she keeps her side of it. Her sanctuaries were mostly on the edges of things, on mountainsides, at marshes, at the boundary between the ploughed land and the forest. She belongs where the roads end. Her domain is the hunt, and the wild animals, and the untouched places, and the moon. Though, as with her brother and the sun, the lunar identification grows stronger in later periods and is not the earliest layer, she is also, as we said, the protector of women in childbirth, which sits oddly with her virginity until you realize that both are about the same thing. She presides over the moments when a female body is at its most dangerous and least controlled. In some places, girls served her in a bear cult before marriage, dancing in saffron robes, and then left her service to become wives. She governs the wild period of a life and then hands you over. She is often shown as a young woman running, with a short tunic and a bow, a quiver at her shoulder, hounds beside her, a crescent sometimes above her head. Deer are hers, so are bears and cypress trees. and she is astonishingly dangerous. Actaeon was a hunter, a good one, trained by the wisest of the centaurs. He was out on the mountain with his dogs, and he came, by pure accident in most versions, into a clearing where the goddess was bathing. He saw her. That is the entirety of his crime in the kindest tellings. He looked and did not look away fast enough. She flicked water at him, and he began to change. His neck lengthened, his ears grew to points, his hands became hooves, antlers pushed up through his skull. He tried to shout, and produced no human sound at all. And his own hunting dogs, 50 of them, who had loved him and been fed by his hand every day of their lives, saw a stag standing in the water and went for it. They tore him apart, while he tried to tell them his own name. Callisto was one of her sworn companions. Zeus came to her wearing his own daughter's shape, which is one of the ugliest things in all of Greek myth, and she was afterwards found to be pregnant during a bathing halt. The accounts disagree over who did the punishing. Some say Artemis herself, others say Hera, others say Zeus, acting to protect her. She became a bear. Years later, her own son, grown into a hunter, came upon a bear in the woods and raised his spear, and Zeus intervened at the last moment and set them both in the sky. Niobe was a queen of Thebes and the mother of 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters, and she made the mistake of saying out loud, in public, that she was better than Leto, who only managed 2. The twins came down. Apollo killed the sons, and Artemis killed the daughters, and the accounts describe them falling one by one, while their mother watched. In the most harrowing version, the youngest daughter is clutched in Niobe's arms while she begs for that one to be spared, and the arrow comes anyway. Niobe was turned to stone, and the stone wept, and travelers were shown a rock face on a mountain in Asia Minor, with water running down it, and told that this was her. That is what the twins do when their mother is insulted, both of them together without discussion. Orion was a giant hunter, and the one figure who seems to have come genuinely close to her. The versions are numerous and contradictory, which usually means the story mattered enough that everyone wanted their own. In some, he offended her. In some, he assaulted one of her followers. In some, he boasted that he would kill every animal on Earth, and the Earth sent a scorpion to stop him. And in one version, the saddest, Apollo saw his sister growing fond of the man and did not approve. He waited until Orion was swimming far out at sea, with only his head visible above the water, and then challenged Artemis to hit that distant dark speck on the waves. She was the finest archer alive. She could not resist. She shot, and she was perfect, and the tide brought him in. She placed him among the stars, with his hounds and the scorpions set behind him. She also stopped a war fleet. When the Greek army was gathered to sail for Troy, the winds died and would not return. And the seer said that Artemis was angry because the commander had killed a stag in a grove of hers, and boasted about his marksmanship. The price of the wind was his daughter. Iphigenia was brought to the camp under the pretense of a wedding and led to the altar. In one tradition, the sacrifice was completed, and her mother remembered it and killed him for it years later when he came home. In another, at the last instant, Artemis snatched the girl away, left a deer on the altar in her place, and carried her off to serve in a distant temple. The Greeks told both. They could not agree whether that goddess was capable of mercy, and I think that uncertainty is precisely the point of her. There is one story where she is unambiguously the hero. 2 enormous twin giants, sons of Poseidon, decided to storm Olympus by stacking mountains one on top of another. They wanted the queen of the gods, and they wanted Artemis. They ambushed Ares, the god of war himself, and beat him, and shut him inside a bronze jar, where he stayed for 13 months until somebody noticed. And Artemis went to the island where they were. In one version, she offered herself to one of them in exchange for releasing Ares. Then she changed into a deer and sprang out between the 2 giants, and both of them threw at the same instant, and each spear went through the other brother. She did not fight them. She let them kill each other. It is her brother's kind of trick, done in a hunter's way, and it is the only reason the god of war got out of that jar. That is the huntress. She is not cruel exactly, but she is exact. She is the part of the world that does not negotiate. If you stay on the path, if you sacrifice properly, if you do not look where you should not look and do not say what you should not say, she will let you pass. Step off, even by accident, even for a moment, and she will not raise her voice. she will simply draw. So let us go and get him out. Ares is the only god in that hall of whom his own father says out loud in front of everybody that he hates him. The passage is worth quoting in spirit, if not in letter. Zeus tells his son that he is the most hateful to him of all the gods who hold Olympus, that quarreling and wars and fighting are always dear to him, and that he has his mother's unbearable and unyielding temper. And then he adds, and this is the crucial line, that if Ares had been born from any other god, he would already have been thrown lower than the sons of heaven, meaning down into the pit with the elder gods. He is only tolerated because of who his parents are. That is a remarkable thing for a culture to say about its own god of war, because the Greeks fought constantly. They fought each other, city against city, for centuries. Their literature is soaked in it. Their finest achievements were funded by it. And yet the god who embodied it was by common consent a brute and something of an embarrassment, with far fewer temples than his siblings and very little in the way of a personal cult in most of the Greek world. He was associated with the north, with Thrace, which is to say with somewhere else, with people who were not quite properly Greek. Understanding why requires understanding what he actually is, and he is not war. Ares is the moment inside the battle when everything human drops away. He is the roar in your ears and the red at the edges of your sight, and the thing that makes a man keep stabbing a body that has already stopped moving. He is bloodlust, he is the loss of self in violence. And the Greeks, who valued self-control above almost every other quality, found him repellent precisely because they knew exactly how it felt and how easily it took them. His companions tell you everything. 2 sons ride with him into battle, and their names are Fear and Terror. His sister or companion is the goddess of strife, the same one who threw the golden apple. The war goddess Enyo goes with him, sacker of cities. In some accounts, the death spirits follow behind, dragging bodies off the field by the ankles. He is the son of Zeus and Hera, which makes him, technically, the most legitimate of all the male children in that hall. There is a real irony there. The properly born son of the king and queen is the one nobody wants, while the children of mistresses and one-night deceptions run the world. And he loses. That is the thing about him that the poets seem to have enjoyed most. For a god of war, Ares has a remarkable record of humiliation. He is beaten by Athena repeatedly. In the Great War poem, she guides a mortal spear straight into his belly, and Ares screams with the voice of 9,000 or 10,000 men and flies up to Olympus to complain to his father, showing off the wound, and his father tells him to stop whining. Later, she picks up a boundary stone from the ground, an old rough marker, and throws it at him, and knocks him down flat across 7 acres of ground, and stands over him laughing. He is beaten by Heracles, who is a mortal at the time. He is beaten by 2 overgrown giants and shut in a bronze jar for 13 months and needs his half-sister to talk him out. And he is caught in a net, naked, in front of everybody, in the story we are about to reach. He is not a coward, exactly. He is enthusiastic and physically formidable, and completely without judgment. He backs whichever side he is currently attached to and switches without embarrassment. In the Trojan War, he promises Hera and Athena that he will fight for the Greeks, and then goes and fights for the Trojans instead, because his lover is on that side. There is one story where he is dignified, and it is oddly important. His daughter was assaulted by a son of Poseidon, and Ares killed the man for it. Poseidon demanded justice, and so the gods held a trial on a rocky hill in Athens, and Ares stood before them and was acquitted. That hill was afterwards called the Hill of Ares, and it became the site of the most venerable court in Athens, where murder cases were tried for centuries. The first murder trial in the world, in the Greek imagining, had the god of violence in the dock, and the verdict was that killing is sometimes lawful and that the question must be decided by a court, rather than by more killing. That is the Greeks doing what the Greeks did best, taking the thing they feared most and building an institution on top of it. His children were mostly what you would expect: Fear and Terror, a daughter who founded a dynasty and carried a cursed necklace, warlike sons who founded warlike cities. The Amazons, in some accounts, were descended from him. But there was one relationship in his life that was not violent at all, and it is the most famous thing about him, because the god of war loved the goddess of love, and she loved him back, and neither of them was married to the other. She had 2 births, and the Greeks never chose between them. The older and stranger version comes from the oldest surviving account of how the gods came to be. When the first sky god was mutilated by his son, and the severed part was thrown into the sea, the water frothed white around it, and out of that foam a figure rose, fully grown, immeasurably beautiful. She came ashore, in some tellings at Cythera, and then at Cyprus, and grass sprang up where her feet touched the sand, and desire and love walked beside her from that first moment. Her name was explained by the Greeks as meaning the one born from foam, which modern scholars think is folk etymology rather than true derivation. But the image is unforgettable. Consider what that origin actually says. Aphrodite is older than Zeus. She is older than every other Olympian by a full generation. She was not born into the family, she predates it. And she came out of an act of castration and civil war. Love, in that account, is what the sea made out of a wound. The other version, and it is the one the war poetry uses, is much simpler. She is a daughter of Zeus, and a goddess named Dione, and she is one of his children like the rest. In that account, when she is wounded on the battlefield at Troy, she runs to her mother and cries, and her father tells her, not unkindly, that fighting is not her department and she should go back to the things she is good at. Take your pick. The Greeks kept both. Her domain is desire, and it is essential to see how large that is. Not romance, not affection, not marriage, which belongs to Hera. Aphrodite is the force that makes things join. She was worshipped as a goddess of the sea and of safe voyages in some places, and startlingly, as a war goddess in Sparta, armed, which makes a certain sense if you think about what desire actually does to people. She is the compulsion that overrides judgment, and the Greeks regarded it as a genuine external force, something that happens to you rather than something you decide. She owned an embroidered band, sometimes called a girdle, worn across the breast, and woven into it were longing and persuasion, and the sweet talk that steals the wits even of the wise. It made whoever wore it irresistible. Hera borrowed it once, as we heard, to disable her husband. Her son, in most accounts, was Eros, Desire himself, who carried the bow and shot without looking and without conscience. Her other companions were the Graces and the Seasons, and she was attended by doves and sparrows and swans. Her sacred places were Cyprus and Cythera, and the great mountain sanctuary at Corinth. And she was married, against her will, to the ugliest god on the mountain. That was Zeus's doing, and there are several explanations for it. In some accounts it was a straightforward political solution, because her beauty was causing such competition among the gods that a marriage was needed to settle the matter. In others, it was the price paid to free Hera from a trap her son had built. Either way, the goddess of desire was handed to the god of the forge, and the marriage was, from her side, an administrative arrangement. So she went to Ares, and the story of what happened is sung, in the oldest source we have for it, by a blind bard at a royal court, as entertainment, and everybody laughs. The sun sees everything. That is his function. He saw the two of them together in the forge god's own house and in the forge god's own bed, and he went straight to the husband and told him. Hephaestus did not shout. He went to his workshop and thought about it, and then he made something. A net. Chains so fine that they were invisible, finer than spider silk, and utterly unbreakable even by a god. He hung it over the bed and arranged it so that it would fall at a touch. Then he announced, loudly, that he was going away to his favorite island for a while. Ares was watching the house. He saw him leave and went straight in, and the net came down. They could not move, not a finger. And Hephaestus came back and stood in the doorway and shouted for the gods to come and see. And they came, all of them, and stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them lying there trapped and naked, and they laughed. The poem says the laughter was unquenchable. Hephaestus made a formal legal argument to the assembled gods about the bride price he had paid and demanded it back. And the male gods stood there enjoying themselves. And one of them, the messenger god, was asked whether he would like to be in that position, tangled up and humiliated in front of everyone, and he answered immediately that he would, and gladly, and that he would accept 3 times as many chains for it. The goddesses, the poem notes carefully, stayed away out of modesty. It was Poseidon who finally brokered the release, promising to pay the debt himself if Ares defaulted. And the moment the net lifted, the two of them were gone, Ares north to Thrace, Aphrodite south to Cyprus, where her attendants washed her and oiled her and dressed her and made her lovely again. And the entire episode cost her precisely nothing. That is the story. And the punchline is not what it appears to be. The wronged husband did everything right. He gathered his evidence, built his case, made his arrest, summoned witnesses, and stated his claim in public. And he still lost, because the audience took the side of the beautiful people. There is something in that which anyone who has ever been publicly and correctly in the right will recognize immediately. They had children together, fear and terror, which is a genuinely disturbing piece of theology, that love and war together produce panic, and harmonia, harmony, which is either a joke or the deepest thing in the whole system, depending on your mood. Her other loves are a catalogue of consequences. Anchises, a Trojan prince, whom she came to disguised as a mortal girl and afterwards told, in terror, never to boast about it. Their son was Aeneas, who survived the fall of Troy and became, in Roman hands, the founder of everything. Adonis, a young man of impossible beauty whom she loved, and who was killed by a boar while hunting. And from his blood came the anemone, and women across the Greek world mourned him every year in festivals of grief. She and Persephone quarreled over him so bitterly that Zeus had to divide his year between them, which is the abduction story told again in a different key. And she punished. She made a woman fall in love with her own son. She destroyed a young man who devoted himself to Artemis and refused desire altogether, because refusal is the one thing she does not permit. She sent madness into the queen who insulted her, and she started the war. At the wedding of a sea goddess and a mortal man, all the gods were invited, except the goddess of strife, who came anyway and threw a golden apple into the hall inscribed for the fairest. Hera claimed it, Athena claimed it, Aphrodite claimed it. A Trojan prince was made to judge. Hera offered him empire. Athena offered him victory in every battle he ever fought, and Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world. He chose her, and the most beautiful woman in the world was already married to a Greek king, and when the prince took her away with him, he broke the sacred bond between guest and host, which was Zeus's own law. So 1,000 ships sailed, and a city that had stood for generations was burned to the ground, and heroes on both sides died, and the survivors scattered across the sea for decades. All of it because 3 goddesses wanted an apple, and a young man made the choice most young men make, which leaves the man in the doorway, the one holding the net. Hephaestus is, to my mind, the most interesting figure on the mountain, and he is certainly the one least like the rest of them. Every other Olympian is beautiful. He is not. Every other Olympian moves with that particular effortless divine grace. He does not. He limps. His feet are turned, and in the oldest poetry the other gods laugh at the way he moves around the hall. And he made almost everything they own. There are 2 accounts of his birth, and they contradict each other completely, and both were current. In one, he is the son of Zeus and Hera, born in the ordinary way. In the other, and this one is very old, Hera bore him entirely alone, without any father at all, in retaliation for Zeus producing Athena out of his own head. If he could make a child by himself, so could she, and she would prove it. The trouble is that the child she produced by herself was, in her eyes, imperfect, and what she did next is the wound at the center of him. She threw him off the mountain. That is one version. In another, it was Zeus who threw him, much later, and for a completely different reason. Hera had angered her husband by raising a storm at sea to try and kill Heracles, and Zeus punished her by hanging her from the sky with anvils on her ankles. Every god was forbidden to help her, and her son, the son she had discarded, tried to cut her down, and Zeus caught him by the foot and threw him from the threshold of heaven. In the god's own words in the oldest poem, he fell all day, and at sunset he landed on the island of Lemnos, and there was not much life left in him. The people of that island took care of him. Whichever version you prefer, and the Greeks used both. The essential facts are the same. He was rejected by a parent, thrown from the height of the world, fell for an entire day, and was broken by the landing. In another tradition, the sea goddess Thetis and an ocean nymph caught him as he fell into the water and hid him in a cave beneath the sea for 9 years, and he made jewelry for them in the dark. And that was where he learned his craft. He did not come back angry and shouting. That is not his way. He came back with a gift. He sent up to Olympus a throne, Gold, exquisite, the finest piece of work anyone had ever seen, made specially for the queen of the gods. And Hera, delighted, sat down in it, and it closed on her. Invisible bonds, unbreakable, holding her fast, and in some tellings lifting her up off the floor into mid-air. She could not move, and nobody on Olympus could release her, because nobody on Olympus knew how it worked. They sent for him. He refused to come. Ares went down to fetch him by force, and was driven back from the forge by firebrands. The gods argued and pleaded, and offered him things, and he sat in his workshop, and let his mother hang. It was Dionysus who solved it, and he solved it in the only way that could ever have worked. He went down to the forge and did not argue at all. He simply visited, and talked, and brought wine. And he kept coming back. And eventually he got the smith thoroughly drunk, loaded him onto the back of a mule, and led him up the mountain in a slow, ridiculous laughing procession. And Hephaestus, cheerful at last, undid the chains. That scene, the smith on the donkey being brought home drunk, was one of the most popular subjects in all of Greek vase painting. They loved it. It is the return of the exile, and it is achieved not by force or by justice, but by somebody being kind to him for long enough. The terms of his return included a marriage. He was given Aphrodite, which we have already seen turn out badly. In some accounts, the marriage was precisely the price he demanded for freeing his mother, which recasts the whole thing rather sadly. The rejected son asks for the most beautiful thing in existence as proof that he is not contemptible and gets it. And it does not work because that was never the problem. Now, what he made. He made the thunderbolts, working alongside the Cyclopes, which means the king's authority literally comes out of his forge. He made the aegis. He made the thrones and the halls of Olympus itself, and the great gates, and the mechanical carts that carried food into the dining hall. He made the arrows of Apollo and Artemis. He made the necklace of Harmonia. He made the chariots the gods travel in. He made the bronze giant that guarded the island of Crete, striding round the coast 3 times a day. He made the shield of Achilles, and the description of that shield is one of the greatest passages in ancient literature. An entire world, engraved in metal, cities at peace and cities at war, ploughing and harvest, and a wedding and a murder trial, and dancing children. The whole of human life, set out in circles around a central image of the earth and sky and sea. And he made helpers. This is the detail that never fails to astonish people. In the old poetry, when a visitor comes to his workshop, she is supported on either side by golden handmaidens that he built. And the poet says that they look like living girls, and that there is intelligence in their minds, and speech, and strength, and that they have been taught their work by the immortal gods, machines that think and speak, forged in bronze, nearly 3,000 years ago. He also built self-moving tripods on golden wheels that rolled by themselves into the assembly of the gods and rolled home again. And he made Pandora. On Zeus's orders, he shaped the first woman out of clay and water, and the other gods dressed and adorned her, and she was sent down to humanity carrying a sealed jar. Look at that list and notice what it means. The god they laugh at made the weapon that rules them, the armor that protects them, the halls they live in, the chairs they sit on, and the trap that caught the 2 most beautiful of them in front of everybody. Take Hephaestus out of Olympus, and the entire apparatus of divine power falls apart. He is the only one of them who works. He is the only one with soot on his hands. His cult was strongest in the places that made things. Athens, the manufacturing center of the classical Greek world, honored him seriously, and his temple still stands above the old marketplace there, one of the best preserved Greek temples anywhere. Lemnos, the island he fell on, was his sacred ground. Where there were furnaces and craftsmen, there was Hephaestus. And there is one more thing about him, easy to miss, that I think is the key to the whole character. In the first book of the Great War poem, the gods are on the brink of a serious quarrel. Zeus and Hera are shouting at each other, and it is turning genuinely dangerous. And it is Hephaestus who steps in. He goes to his mother, and he gives her a cup, and he says, more or less, please let it go, because I cannot bear to see you hurt, and I cannot help you. And I remember what happened last time I tried. And then, to break the mood, he bustles about pouring the drinks for everybody himself, hobbling from god to god, and they all laugh at the sight of him doing it. He makes himself the joke on purpose, to stop the fight. That is the god of the forge, thrown away twice, broken by the fall, married to someone who did not want him, laughed at every day for eternity, and quietly indispensable, and when it actually mattered, the only peacemaker in the room. Somebody had to carry the messages up and down that mountain, and somebody had to be quick enough and clever enough to survive doing it. That was Hermes, and he began his career at the age of about 1 day by committing a serious crime. His mother was Maia, a shy daughter of Atlas, who lived alone in a deep shadowy cave on a mountain in Arcadia and avoided the company of the other gods entirely. Zeus came to her there at night, while Hera slept, and nobody knew. She bore a son in that cave, and the old hymn about him is one of the funniest and most charming things to survive from the ancient world. He was born at dawn. By midday he had invented the lyre, by evening he had stolen his elder brother's cattle, and he was back in his cradle before anyone noticed. Here is how it went. He climbed out of the cradle almost immediately, went to the mouth of the cave, and found a tortoise wandering past. He greeted it politely, told it that it would be far more useful to him indoors, killed it, hollowed out the shell, fixed reed and ox hide and 7 strings of sheep gut across it, and had invented a musical instrument before he could walk properly. He played it and sang, improvising, about his own parents and how they had met, and then he got hungry and he wanted meat. So he went north, to the pastures where the cattle of the gods grazed, and he cut 50 of them out of Apollo's herd, and he drove them away backwards, so that the hoofprints pointed the wrong direction. And he wore sandals he had woven himself out of branches, enormous, shapeless things, so that his own tracks made no sense at all. An old man working in a vineyard saw him pass, and Hermes told him to keep quiet about it. He drove them to a river, killed 2, invented fire-making with a drill of laurel wood, roasted the meat and divided it into 12 equal portions, 1 for each of the gods, including himself. That detail is theologically enormous. A newborn thief performing a formal sacrifice and counting himself in as the 12th god is a claim to a seat. He wanted the meat, yes, but he was also filing an application. Then he shrank himself down like mist and slipped back through the keyhole of the cave and into his cradle, and lay there with the blanket pulled up, holding his lyre under his arm, looking exactly like a helpless infant. Apollo, of course, worked it out, because Apollo is the god of knowing things, and he came storming into that cave in a rage. And what follows is one of the great comic scenes in ancient literature. This newborn baby, wrapped in swaddling, looks up at the furious god of prophecy and says, in effect, "Cattle? What are cattle? I was born yesterday. I do not know what a cow looks like. My feet are soft. I am interested in sleep and my mother's milk and warm baths." And he swore a great oath that he had not done it, which was a lie, and which is why he became the god of oaths sworn in bad faith, and of the loophole. Apollo hauled him up to Olympus and put the case before Zeus. And Zeus, listening to this infant lie fluently and charmingly to the most authoritative god in the pantheon, laughed out loud. He was delighted. He ordered them to sort it out between them. So they went to fetch the cattle, and on the way Hermes took out the lyre and started to play. And Apollo stopped walking. Because Apollo is the god of music, and he had never heard anything like it, and he wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything. He said straight out that the thing was worth 50 cattle, and that they could settle the whole dispute right now. Hermes handed it over. In exchange he received the cattle, and a golden staff, and Apollo's friendship, and a role in prophecy of a lesser kind, involving 3 bee maidens who told the truth when they had eaten honey and lied when they had not. The thief gave his victim a gift and came away with everything. That is Hermes exactly. He does not fight anyone. He never wins by force. He wins by exchange, by charm, by finding the trade that leaves everyone satisfied and himself better off. His domains follow from that first day with a beautiful logic. He is the god of travelers and roads. He is the god of merchants and trade and profit. He is the god of thieves, without any embarrassment about the combination, because commerce and theft are 2 applications of the same skill. He is the god of heralds and messengers and negotiation. He is the god of luck, particularly the sudden windfall. He is the god of shepherds and their flocks. He is the god of athletics and of the wrestling ground. He is the inventor of the lyre and the pipes, and in some accounts, of fire-making, weights and measures, the alphabet, and dice. And underneath all of it, there is one single principle, which is that Hermes is the god of crossing. Every domain he has is about moving between two states that are supposed to be separate, between one country and another, between the owner of a thing and someone else, between truth and falsehood, between waking and dreaming, because he is the one who brings sleep and dreams, and between the living and the dead. That last one is his most solemn office. Hermes is the guide of souls. When you die, he is the one who comes for you and walks you down, not to judge you, not to punish you, just to make sure you get there, because the way is dark and unfamiliar, and you have never done this before. In a religion with remarkably little comfort in it, that is a genuinely comforting idea, and it is the reason his image stood in so many houses. Those images are worth mentioning all over Greece, at crossroads and at boundaries and on either side of doorways. The Greeks set up square stone pillars with a carved head on top and a set of male genitals halfway down the shaft. They were called Hermes. They marked the edge of a property or the fork of a road, and they were there for protection and for luck. They were so ordinary that people barely noticed them, and so sacred that when a group of vandals went round Athens one night in the middle of a war and smashed the faces off nearly all of them, the city fell into a genuine panic and a political crisis, and the resulting scandal contributed to the destruction of an entire military expedition. He is everywhere in the myths, always at the moment when something needs to get from one place to another. He kills the 100-eyed guardian and frees Io, and afterwards carries the title Slayer of Argus for the rest of time. He goes down into the underworld to bring Persephone up. He carries the infant Dionysus away to safety. He goes to the nymph who is holding Odysseus captive and delivers the order that lets him go home, and later meets the same man on a beach and gives him a herb that protects him from a witch's transformation. He leads the three goddesses to the Trojan prince for the judgment. He gives Perseus the winged sandals. He guides an old king through an enemy camp at night, past every sentry, to beg for the body of his son, and that scene where the god of thieves puts an entire army to sleep so that a father can kneel to the man who killed his child, is one of the tenderest things in Greek literature. He is usually shown with a broad-brimmed traveller's hat, winged sandals, and the herald's staff with two serpents twined around it, young in later art, bearded in the earliest. And of all the Olympians, he is the one who seems to genuinely like human beings. The others use us, test us, punish us, occasionally sleep with us. Hermes does business with us. He turns up on the road when you are lost. He is the reason you find money in an old coat. He is the friend of merchants and of liars and of everyone who has to make their way in the world without any power to speak of, using only their wits and their charm and the willingness to try something, which is nearly everybody. That leaves one throne, and it is the one with the strangest history, because it was not originally his. Hestia was the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea. She was the first swallowed, and since her father brought them up in reverse order, the last released, which the Greeks noted with some satisfaction, calling her both the eldest and the youngest. Her domain was the hearth, not the house, not the family, but the fire in the middle of the room, the one that never goes out. Understand what that meant to them. There were no matches. Restarting a dead fire was difficult and unpleasant. So the fire in the center of the house was maintained continuously, banked at night, fed in the morning, kept alive across generations. It cooked the food, warmed the room, and every sacrifice began and ended with an offering to it. When a Greek city sent out settlers to found a new colony overseas, they carried fire from the public hearth of the mother city with them across the sea and lit the new city's hearth from it. That is Hestia. She is continuity. Both Poseidon and Apollo wanted to marry her, and she refused them both, and went to Zeus and asked to remain unmarried forever. He granted it and gave her something better, which was the first portion of every sacrifice, in every house, in every city, always. She sits at the center and does not move. There are almost no myths about her, and that is not a gap in the record, it is the point. She does not have adventures. She does not have grievances. She never leaves. And when a new god came to the mountain, the tradition says, she stood up and gave him her seat and went and sat by the fire instead. That tradition is a later systematizing one, and I want to be straight with you about that. The Greeks did not have a formal document listing 12 gods, and the exchange of seats is a tidy explanation invented to reconcile two different lists that both existed. But It is a good explanation and it captures something true, which is that Dionysus arrived late and had to be fitted in, and that the person who made room for him was the one god with no ambition. So who was he? His mother was Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes, and we have already heard how she died, destroyed by the sight of her lover in his full divinity because Hera planted a question in her mind. But she was pregnant when it happened, and Zeus, in the middle of the fire, snatched the unborn child out of her burning body and cut open his own thigh and sewed the infant inside it, and carried him there until he came to term. He was born twice, once from a woman who died, and once from a god's leg. It is a peculiar and slightly absurd image, and it is also the most important fact about him, because Dionysus is the god who comes back. Everything about him is about the boundary between death and life being less solid than it looks. Hera was not finished. Even after the second birth she pursued the child, and Zeus had him carried away, in some accounts by Hermes, to be raised in secret in a place called Nysa, which is not anywhere real, by nymphs and by the old drunken satyr Silenus. In some traditions, he was disguised as a girl to hide him. In others, Hera found him anyway and struck him with madness, and he wandered the earth for years out of his mind, until he was eventually cured. And in the course of that wandering, he found the vine. That is what he brings, not simply the drink. The Greeks were clear-eyed about wine in a way we sometimes are not. It was, for them, a genuine miracle and a genuine danger. Here is a fruit that rots, and the rotting produces something that changes the mind. It makes the shy talkative. It makes the grieving able to bear the evening. It dissolves the barrier between you and the person sitting opposite you. And it makes some people violent and some people foolish, and it destroys some people entirely. It is not good, and it is not bad. It is a door, and the god of that door is not safe. He travelled with a following, and that following is like nothing else in Greek religion. Satyrs, half human and unruly, and the Maenads, the raving ones, human women who left their houses and their weaving and their husbands, and went up into the mountains at night dressed in fawn skins, crowned with ivy, carrying a staff tipped with a pine cone. They danced until the ordinary self came apart. In the stories they suckle wild animals and strike rocks so that water and milk and wine come out, and they also tear living creatures to pieces with their bare hands and eat the flesh raw. The Greeks, who lived in a society that restricted respectable women very severely, told stories about a god who came and called those women out of their homes and into the dark, and they told them with a mixture of fascination and pure terror. The god who is met with hospitality gives extraordinary gifts. The god who is refused destroys. A king of Thrace refused him, and drove his followers out with an ox goad, and was struck mad and killed his own son with an axe, believing he was pruning a vine. A ship of pirates found a beautiful young man on a shore and seized him, thinking he was a prince worth ransoming. The ropes would not hold him. They fell off his hands and feet by themselves. The helmsman understood at once, and begged the others to let him go, and they refused. Then wine began to run across the deck of the ship, fragrant and sweet, and a vine grew up the mast and spread over the sail, and ivy wound round the oars, and the god turned into a lion in the middle of the deck. The pirates went over the side, and as they hit the water, they became dolphins, and the helmsman, the only one who had shown respect, was spared. A king of Phrygia gave hospitality to the god's lost old tutor, and returned him safely, and was granted a wish, and asked that everything he touched become gold, and nearly starved to death before he was allowed to wash the gift off in a river. And then there is Thebes, his mother's own city, and the tragedy about it is one of the greatest plays ever written. He came home, and his own family refused to believe that his mother had ever slept with a god, saying she had simply got herself pregnant by some man and invented the story and been struck by lightning for the lie. His cousin Pentheus was king, a young, rigid, controlling man who saw the new cult spreading among the women of the city and set out to crush it. So Dionysus, disguised as a gentle, long-haired stranger, let himself be arrested. And in prison he questioned the king quietly, and the king found that he could not get a grip on him at all, that the ropes came undone and the walls shook, and the man simply smiled. And then, very gently, the stranger asked whether the king would like to go and see what the women were doing up on the mountain, and the king said yes. That is the moment the play turns, and it is one of the most frightening things in literature, because from that instant Pentheus is no longer himself. He puts on a woman's dress because the stranger suggests it, and fusses about the hang of his hair and the pleating of his skirt. The man who wanted to control everything is now being dressed like a doll by the thing he tried to suppress. He is led up the mountain and set in a tree to watch. And the women see him. His own mother is among them, and she is out of her mind, and she sees a lion in a tree. They pull the tree down, and she tears her son apart with her own hands and carries his head back into the city on a stick in triumph, calling out for everyone to see the beast she has killed, and it is only when her father takes her face in his hands and asks her quietly to look properly that the madness lifts and she understands what she is holding. That is the god of wine, not a cheerful drunk in a vine crown, a force that arrives when you refuse to make room for it and takes your mind apart. He found a wife, and it is the one straightforwardly happy love story on Olympus. Ariadne had helped a hero escape a labyrinth and had run away with him, and he abandoned her, asleep, on the island of Naxos. Dionysus found her there, he married her, and he was faithful, and when she died he took the crown from her head and threw it into the sky, where it became a circle of stars. The god of madness was the best husband on the mountain. The Greeks enjoyed that irony very much, and he gave us the theatre. This is not a metaphor. Tragedy and comedy grew out of the festivals of Dionysus in Athens, performed in his precinct, in front of his priest, as an act of worship. The word tragedy appears to mean goat song. Every play that survives from classical Athens was written for his festival, so the entire tradition of Western drama begins as a religious rite for the god of masks and altered states, which makes complete sense when you think about what an actor actually does, which is stop being himself for a while in front of a crowd. There is one further tradition about him, and I flag it clearly as a separate strand rather than the mainstream story. In the mystical Orphic teachings, there is a different Dionysus, sometimes called Zagreus, a child of Zeus and Persephone who was lured away by the Titans with toys and a mirror, torn to pieces and eaten. Zeus destroyed the Titans with lightning, and from the ashes humanity was made, which is why we contain something of the Titans and something of the god. The heart of the child was saved and the god was reborn. This is not the story most Greeks told. It belonged to a specific religious movement with its own texts and its own ideas about the soul. But it shows you how deep the idea went of a god who is torn apart and comes back. He is the last of the 12 and the least Olympian of them. He does not really live on the mountain. He is out on the roads, in the mountains at night, in the vineyard, in the theatre, arriving in the city as a stranger. He is the god you would least expect to find a throne, sitting in a seat that was given to him rather than seized. And now the hall is full. Let us stand in the doorway for a moment and look at them all together, because the whole point of tonight was never 12 separate portraits. It was the family. Down the middle, the king, holding the only weapon that matters, surrounded by his own children, still watching for the one who will replace him and quietly confident that he has already dealt with it. Beside him, his sister and his wife, older than he is, tricked into the marriage, unable to leave it, unable to win, running a permanent campaign of retaliation against everyone he has ever touched. Across from him, his brother of the sea, who has a kingdom of his own and takes orders under protest. His other sister, who has been to Eleusis and back, and who knows something about grief that none of them do. Then the second generation, arranged around the throne like the points of a compass. Athena at his right hand, the outmaneuvered prophecy, the one child he does not fear, wearing his shield. Apollo and Artemis, the twins born in exile because of Hera's curse, who between them hold prophecy, plague, healing, music, the wilderness, and the arrow that never misses, and who will kill 14 children in an afternoon if you insult their mother. Ares, the legitimate son, despised by his father, beaten by his half-sister every time they meet. Aphrodite, who may be older than all of them, married to the smith and sleeping with the soldier. Hephaestus, thrown off the mountain and back on it, who made the throne the king sits in, the bolt the king throws, and the trap the queen sat in. Hermes, moving constantly between all of them and everywhere else. And Dionysus, arriving last, in the seat the goddess of the hearth stood up and gave him. Now look at the alliances, because they are consistent and they matter. There is a permanent alignment between Zeus and Athena, the only stable partnership in the building. There is a permanent hostility between Athena and Poseidon, running from the contest over Athens through the whole of the Trojan War and its aftermath. There is a permanent hostility between Athena and Ares, which is the argument between intelligence and force conducted in public forever. Hera and Athena are usually on the same side, bound by their shared humiliation over a golden apple. Aphrodite and Artemis are opposed on principle, one representing surrender to desire, and the other its absolute refusal, and mortals get destroyed in the crossfire of that argument regularly. Apollo and Hermes, who began as thief and victim, end up as genuine friends, which is unusual up there. And Hephaestus and Dionysus, the outsider and the latecomer, have the warmest bond in the whole, because one of them once went down to a forge and just kept turning up. The place where all these fault lines break open at once is the war at Troy, and it is worth seeing it for what it structurally is, which is a family argument conducted with human beings as counters. Hera and Athena work relentlessly for the destruction of Troy because of the judgment of a prince. Aphrodite defends it because she won that judgment and because her own son is in the city. Poseidon works against Troy because a king cheated him out of his wages for building the walls. Apollo defends Troy and shoots plague into the Greek camp, and eventually guides the arrow that kills the greatest of the Greek warriors. Artemis stands with her brother and holds the Greek fleet at anchor until a girl is put on an altar. Ares switches sides because of Aphrodite. Hermes ferries messages and guides an old man through the enemy lines at night. Hephaestus makes a shield for one hero and holds back a river to save another. And Zeus sits above it, forbidding intervention, permitting it, weighing fates in golden scales, and weeping when his own son's turn comes. 10 years, a city erased, thousands dead, and underneath it, 3 goddesses and an apple, and a builder who was not paid. That is the Greek view of history, and it is not flattering to anyone. Human catastrophe is what happens at ground level when the family on the mountain has a disagreement. And yet, and this is the thing that keeps drawing people back to these gods after nearly 3,000 years, they are not remote. They are not perfect. They are recognizably, embarrassingly, magnificently like us. They sulk. They hold grudges for centuries. They cheat and get caught and lie about it badly. They have favorites among their children and make no attempt to hide it. They laugh at each other's misfortunes. They are vain about their appearance and touchy about their status and absolutely unable to let anything go. Other cultures gave their gods perfection and demanded belief. The Greeks gave theirs appetite and demanded respect. You did not have to think Zeus was good. Nobody thought Zeus was good. You had to acknowledge that he was there, that the sky was his, and that the rules he guarded, the oath, the guest, the suppliant, held whether he personally kept them or not. And above all of them, above even the king, sat the one thing none of them could touch: fate, the thread measured and cut. Zeus can destroy a city with a gesture, and he cannot add a single day to the life of a son he loves. That is the ceiling of the whole system, and it is why these stories have the weight they do. Even the immortals live inside limits. Even the thunder answers to something. There is a passage in the oldest of the war poems where a mortal, asked his lineage in the middle of a battle, says that the generations of men are like the generations of leaves. The wind scatters them on the ground, and the tree buds and grows more when the spring comes back. And so one generation of men comes into being, and another passes away. He says it to an enemy who is about to try to kill him, and then they exchange armor instead and part as friends, because their grandfathers had once been host and guest, and that bond outlives everything. That is what the Greeks made out of these 12 quarreling immortals. Not a moral system, a way of looking at a world that is beautiful and arbitrary, and often cruel, and finding in it something worth behaving well inside. The temples closed eventually. The oracle at Delphi fell silent. The great gold and ivory statues were carried off or melted down or simply crumbled, and the roofs came off the halls, and grass grew through the floors where the processions had walked. The gods did not fight for it. There was no last battle. The world simply turned, and the offerings stopped, and the mountain was, once again, only a mountain. But go and stand at the foot of it, in northern Greece, on a clear morning in early summer. The peak is up there nearly 3,000 meters above you, with the cloud closed around it like a lid. And you cannot see the top. You still cannot see the top. Whatever is up there is going about its business without you, exactly as it always has. And you are down here in the valley with the olives and the goats and the road, wondering. That feeling, precisely that one, is where all of this came from. 12 thrones, one family, a king who is afraid of his own children, a queen who cannot forgive, a smith who built the chairs, and a goddess who gave up her seat and sat down by the fire instead. The lamps in the hall are still burning, they always are. And now the story ends. Sleep well,